We are on day 146 of the war with Gaza, and the fighting is continuing on all fronts. In Gaza, the IDF forces are continuing their fighting in Khan Yunis, expanding also that fighting all around that southern area, moving more and more into the western areas of Khan Yunis, also trying to consolidate the control in the northern Gaza Strip and in the center of the Gaza Strip. In the north, the fighting is carried on with a number of barrages from Hezbollah fired into Israel today, and even direct hits. That is the war that we keep on saying is the war that no one is talking about. It's a war for all intents and purposes, and its intensity is growing from day to day. In Judea and Samaria, the terrorists are continuing on their efforts also to carry out more terrorist attacks, and the IDF is responding with more and more arrests of the terrorists, and when necessary, even using UAVs to take out the terrorists in their hideouts. What we're going to discuss today really is probably one of the more sensitive subjects of this conflict. On the 7th of October, when the terrorists entered Israel and murdered over 1,200 people, they also took 253 hostages. Of those hostages, there are still 134 hostages in the Gaza Strip. 112 have been released in different deals. There's a number of bodies have been recovered by the IDF. Unfortunately, 3 of the hostages were killed by IDF friendly fire, and 3 hostages have been so far rescued in IDF operations. Now, what we're talking about at the moment is how to bring about the release of the remaining hostages, 134 hostages in total. Of them, 130 that were kidnapped, taken hostage on the 7th of October and are still alive or have been killed since by the terrorists, and another 4 that were already, 4 Israelis were held hostage prior to the 7th of October. The discussions so far have been, if you remember, on day 51, 52, 53, there were a series of releases of hostages in return for the release of terrorists. Israel released some 300 terrorists that were being held in the prisons that had been arrested prior to the attack and had been either pending standing trial or had already been convicted of terrorist attacks. How do we bring about the release of the others? Now, that's the discussion that we're going to have today with Brigadier General in the reserves, Yossi Kuperwasser, discussing really the strategic aspects behind the Israeli hostage negotiations. How do you carry out those negotiations? What's helpful? What's not helpful? Is it helpful setting a deadline and saying, well, we're going to reach a deal by a certain day, as was famously done just a few days ago in an ice cream parlor? Or are there better ways to go about securing the release of the hostages? Yossi, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Give us a little bit of your insights as to what's going on with hostages, where the negotiations are standing, best negotiating practices, and what to do and what not to do.
Well, as we all know, there was an ongoing effort to find a way to release the hostages in exchange for releasing some of the terrorists that are still in Israeli jails. And all kinds of other elements that were supposed to be part of a framework that was worked out in Paris a couple of days ago, and then its details were looked upon in a meeting in Qatar, and there was previously a meeting in Cairo, and everybody's doing a very hard job trying to figure out how can we reach an agreement between Israel and Hamas. And yes, the Hamas wants to see the terrorists out of jail. Israel wants to see the hostages back home. And so on the surface, there are some common ground and common interest between Israel and Hamas in this respect. But the problem is not a tactical issue of how exactly to carry out the exchange. The problem is strategic. And that's why what I was looking forward to speak about. Because the perception of the deal is the one element that makes the difference between Israel and the Hamas and affects the demands during the negotiations. For Israel, it has to be able to prove that the deal is a part of its successful offensive against Hamas as a response to what happened on October 7th, and not a prize for Hamas for what they did on October 7th, the massacre they carried out on October 7th. That's why it has to be clear to everybody that Israel is going to continue with the military effort once the pause that is going to be held because of the exchange deal is over, and that under no circumstances, Israel is going to allow Hamas to stay in power in Gaza in the future. For Hamas, the opposite is right. The deal is a tool to prove that they are able to use this weak element of Israel's position, together with other weak elements like the number of casualties and the diminishing patience of the international community to this ongoing war. And but mainly this issue of the hostages, in order to force upon Israel a situation where the war ends in the way that Hamas anticipated it to end right from the beginning. A very heavy and painful Israeli retaliation, but something that is short of destroying Hamas' ability to govern Gaza and leaves Hamas as the governor of Gaza in the future. That is the issue. And that's what everybody who's looking at the hostages deal is trying to figure out. Is that a part of the Israeli future victory over Hamas, or is it a part of the future victory of Hamas over Israel? That is the issue. And unfortunately, some of the players have their own interests, and they are trying to impose their own interests on the strategic interest on the deal. The prisoners are not the main issue for Qatar or for Egypt, but they are interested in seeing a situation that through the hostages deal makes sure that Hamas stays in power, or that makes sure that no refugees go from Gaza to Egypt. That's what the so-called mediators are up to. This is not for them just an attempt to find a solution to contradicting demands of the sides. They are players that have an interest of themselves, and especially Qatar, who really wants to see Hamas winning the war, staying in power. And same goes for the United States. For the United States, the most important thing is to make sure that the hostage deal puts an end to the war, and that this would make it possible for the United States to avoid getting involved in a regional war and being able to go back to business. And if this can even help in promoting the idea of a two-state solution, imposing the two-state solution over Israel, that's even better. And that's what the Americans are up to. They are, of course, very much concerned for the hostages and want to see them released, but in the context of something that would lead to promoting their interests and their worldview about what needs to happen in the Middle East, and especially between Israel and the Palestinians. So it's any attempt that would have helped finding a solution, if we focused on the hostages deal as something that stands by itself and can be perpetrated through the Israeli readiness to make all kinds of payments in order to release the hostages, this would have been easy, relatively easy. But since it has such a huge strategic impact, it's much more difficult to convince the sides to declare that they are ready to accept defeat. Because if the Hamas is going to say that, okay, after releasing the 41st hostages, we are going to accept that the war can resume, that's what's in it for Hamas. The 400 prisoners that are terrorists, prisoners in Israel, that are going to be released. Is that enough for Hamas? No, they want to make sure that they stay in power. And that's why this temporary first stage deal, although it may somehow eventually work out, but it's going to be extremely difficult because everybody looks at it as an element within their strategic view of the situation. That's what makes it so difficult to move forward.
Yossi, can we consider this current war a new type of what we might call hostage warfare, in the sense that this conflict involves a basic asymmetry between, on the one hand, innocent women, children, and elderly civilian hostages, in unprecedented numbers kidnapped by a radical Islamic terrorist organization. On the other hand, convicted terrorists sitting in Israeli jails. Now, the moral equivalence that has been created, certainly in a perceptual level in the West, has mainstreamed, legitimized Hamas to a degree opposite the state of Israel. So that would suggest, from an intelligence and strategic standpoint, that this asymmetry between kidnapped civilians on the one hand by a terrorist organization and military or terrorist convicted criminals, if you will, on the other, gives the terrorist organization an upper hand in terms of its legitimacy over Israel, complicating the entire negotiation process.
Well, I would say that this is not new that we try to release hostages. What's new here is are two elements. First, it's the numbers. We've never seen such a huge number of hostages in the hands of a terrorist organization as vicious as Hamas, that you cannot trust to keep them safe. That's something that hovers over the entire negotiations. It's the numbers and the identity of the hostages. So many women and elderly and a young boy and a toddler. That's what we have over there. It's crazy. That's one difference. And the other difference is more substantial. The other difference is that in previous wars and situations, we did have kidnapped soldiers and that we had to, it was mainly soldiers, that we were trying to release from being captive. But the major part of negotiations was held after the war was over. This was the case in the Second Lebanese War. This was the case in 82. We had a stage of negotiations that followed the war and was not integral part of the war. In 2006, there was an attempt by Prime Minister Olmert at the time, who said that one of the goals of the war is to release the hostages. But this was not true, and this was not the real goal of the war, and they were not released as part of the war. So it's a different story. Here we have a situation where the hostages are a key issue inside the war itself. And we have two goals in the war itself. One is to release the hostages. Second is to, and there's no order in between them. They are parallel in their importance. Releasing the hostages and winning the war and defeating Hamas. These are two goals that we have to prove. And that's why I say it's a strategic matter. We have to prove strategically. It's a strategic issue for us to prove that by putting more pressure on Hamas, we can get a better deal, and that we can get a deal that would release all the hostages while defeating Hamas and kicking them out of Gaza and depriving them from ruling Gaza. That's what we are saying all the time. This is the Israeli strategy. If this strategy doesn't work, it's a problem. And what Hamas is trying to prove is that the opposite is true, that the hostages are a tool within his hands in the context of the war in order to prevent Israel from achieving its goals. And they are trying to do that with, as I said, with other elements, but this is one of the major elements. And the pressures over the Israeli government in this respect are huge. First of all, coming from inside Israel, everybody wants to see those hostages back home, and the government has a commitment here, of course, to bring them back home as soon as possible. And this is something that the government has to walk on the tip of her toes in order to not to look as if they don't consider the hostages as the most important issue. Although they do, but at the same time, they look at defeating Hamas as not less important issue. And they are under pressure from the United States, and what happened today was many Palestinians killed in this attempt to loot the merchandise from the truck that was carrying the humanitarian aid to northern Gaza. Was another reason why the pressure on Israel is building up from the international community. Everybody is going to make a feast out of it and say, okay, Israelis, look what you're doing. You have to put an end to it. And so all of that is building up, and Hezbollah looks at it. They understand how critical the situation is right now regarding the decision of what's going to be with the hostage deal. So they mount their pressure as well. And we saw this today, this interception over Haifa. And the Houthis go on with their activities. The only thing that has died recently a little bit is the operations of the militia, the Iraqi militias, after the Americans carried out some decisive operations against them and delivered the message to Iran: don't play around with us here. So we see a little bit more restrained policy on behalf of the Iraqi militias. But all the rest is boiling, and because everybody understands, if there is a ceasefire or a pause in the fire, but everybody would call it a ceasefire of 40 days or 45 days, including all of Ramadan, the ability of Israel to gain the legitimacy and the support of the United States for resuming the war, when we are going to be already in the very relative, much deeper, maybe not very deep, but much deeper into the American elections process, it's going to be pretty difficult. And we have to make sure that everybody understands that after those 40 days or 45 days, we are going to resume the war and take over Rafah. Unless somebody gives Hamas an offer they can't refuse, to leave Rafah and to evacuate the Gaza Strip and go to Algeria or wherever. So this is what's so necessary for Israel. But on the other side, Hamas is playing their cards, and the United States is playing their cards, its cards, built on the same timetable. They want to see progress towards a Palestinian state by mid 2024. They want to. They are ready to use their leverages like Saudi Arabia, readiness to normalize relations, and the capability of the United States to tell us, look, we are not that happy to give you all this military assistance if you are going to go on with the war. It's, they have leverages, and the strategic impact is going to be much wider than just affecting the situation in Gaza and how everybody looks at the war in Gaza. Because the way people look at the war in Gaza is going to have an immense impact on how everybody looks at the situation in the Middle East. If we end up with a hostage deal that means for everybody that this is the end of the war, then Iran has won, Hezbollah has won, the Iraqi militias and the Houthis have won. That's what's at stake. If on the other hand it's clear that the hostage deal is just a step in the way of defeating Hamas, then the United States have won, then Israel has won, then the Saudis have won. And it's on the expense of all the other Hamas and other members of Iranian axis. So the way the hostage deal is perceived is extremely important strategically, beyond just the question of how many Israelis are going to go back home and what is the price we pay.
But if I understand rightly, Yossi, there's no deal on the table that would bring about the release of all of the hostages. This wouldn't be a deal now that says, you know what, we're going to release all of the hostages, even if it means Hamas staying in power, that which obviously the Israeli government wouldn't want to see. But correct me if I'm wrong, that's not the deal at the moment. What we're talking about is the release of some of the hostages. There are still 19 women, 2 children under the age of 5. But most of the other people are men. Most of them are almost army age. And Yahya Sinwar, Hamas are going to keep on holding some of the hostages really as their guarantee, as their insurance policy, and really until the end. So what we're seeing is just maybe the what's called in Hebrew the shitata salami. We're just taking a little bit off each time, with and really in the knowledge that we're going to have to give in the end and allow them to live. On the other hand, bringing back every single hostage alive, obviously, is something which is saving entire worlds every time. So how do we get over that hurdle?
Well, as far as I understand, the deal is made of 3 stages. The first one is going to be detailed when we enter it, if we enter it. and it's going to deal with releasing 40 of the hostages and 400 and something Palestinian terrorists who are in Israeli jails, and out of which about 15 or 17 are going to be with long sentences, long time sentences, which means that they're probably murderers. But although this is not explicitly said. But there are two other parts of this deal that the details will have to be discussed in the future. They are going to remain open, probably. That's the way I understand for the time being. They are going to be open, and they deal with the release of the rest of the hostages. So 45 days of pause is for the first 40 hostages, but the rest of them will demand more ceasefire, and the discussion about the rest are going to be held while we release and make the exchanges for the first group. So it's something that's all moving into one deal that only the first part is going to be implemented immediately. The rest, we shall see if we can reach an agreement about the rest in the negotiations that are going to be held during the implementation of the first deal.
That would really mean Israel giving up tremendous leverage against Hamas, immediate leverage in the form of the ongoing operations on the ground, and giving away or releasing many of the terrorists, and yet we'll still find ourselves, if we still have 130 hostages, 134 hostages there, 40 come off, that still leaves another 90 plus hostages in the hands of Hamas, and that seems to be a no-win situation. Why would Israel even consider that?
Yeah, well, basically, Israel should not have considered that. Israel should have. The lesson learned from everything I'm saying is that what we need to do is not to wait forever and start moving towards Rafah, because until now, the threat that we shall go to Rafah was supposed to be the leverage we are using, while they are using the leverage of holding the hostages. Okay. But if you seem to be hesitating to move into Rafah, they can get the impression that we are not actually going to enter Rafah eventually. And this gives them a lot more leverage and a lot more maneuverability in those negotiations. So I think that what the lesson learned from what I'm saying, the strategic impact and strategic importance of all that, is that we need to start moving towards Rafah, start calling on the population, that the civilians that are concentrated around Rafah, to move away, to allow us to enter and to make the impression, and maybe if necessary even carried out, that we are just about to enter Rafah. And we don't create this impression at these last couple of days. We speak about it here and there, but we don't make anything on the ground that would create the impression that we are about to enter Rafah. If we don't enter Rafah, then we lose our leverage. And once we lose our leverage, everybody would read the hostage deal as a sign that the war is over. And that, yes, the rest of the hostages are going to be negotiated during the 40 days of pause, and more Palestinian terrorists, heavier Palestinian terrorists with greater murders are going to be released in the second and the third stage. This is why it's so important in my mind at that point of time to stop hesitating, stop moving into the second or third stage of the war in Gaza, just raids here and there, and concentrate the force needed in order to take over Rafah. We have conducted the negotiations with the coordination with the Egyptians to clarify to them what we are going to do and how much we are committed to not allowing Palestinians to cross the border into Egypt. Fine. I hope they understood it. And now it's time to start moving, because we are going to lose the international patience and the international support if we don't do it rapidly. Even now, every day we hear the leaders of Australia, New Zealand, and France, and I don't know what, telling us don't go into Rafah. So it's the more we wait, the more we create the impression that we are really not going to enter into Rafah, the weaker our point is going to be. We have to, if we speak about decisive victory, complete and absolute victory, Rafah has to be in our hands. And I believe this is going to change also Sinwar's point of view, because he would understand that he's lost. He knows he is in a weak position, but he is not convinced he's lost. And we saw the message he delivered to the leadership of Hamas, according to the Wall Street Journal. That means that he still believes that he can get away with this murder. And we have to clarify to him, guy, you're not going to get away with it.
It would seem
we are
that he
coming
has
to you.
every reason to believe that. We seem to be playing into that narrative, stopping the war, the calls to stop for 45 days, the calls to stop for Ramadan, all of these different aspects, I would assume would embolden Sinwar and say, I only have to hold out for another few days. He can't see another Israeli attack moving down into Rafah. So why would he in any way weaken his position or give up on any of his leverage?
Sure, and that's why I'm saying that we have to change policy and adopt a decisive policy concerning Rafah and explain to the Americans, guys, we have to do it. It's for you. It's first of all for us, but it's also for you, because otherwise the Iranians are going to win, and what we're going to get is a nuclear weapon state in Iran, because they will understand that everybody is so afraid of ending up in more conflict. So we can move forward. We don't have any real credible threat that we should face. And the Hezbollah is going to celebrate. Everybody is going to celebrate if we end up in a deal that would be interpreted as the end of the war.
Clearly, Yossi, it seems that one of the biggest lessons learned, even though we're still in the middle of this conflict opposite radical Islamic, Iranian-driven terror organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah in the north, which hasn't even gotten close to its climax, is that every single day the Hamas stalls or forces a stall in our ability to achieve decisive victory. It drives a wedge between our relationship, Israel's relationship with the West. And that seems to me to be their Hamas's big success to date, is that they actually have succeeded to drive conflict between Israel and its closest allies, while it determines the pace and degree of the war, and has already achieved even rhetorical prize with the United States declaration of its intention over the horizon, as they say, to recognize a Palestinian state, while we still have over about 130 hostages under Hamas's rule. From a perceptual standpoint, and even from a strategic, non-military standpoint, it looks at this point like it's like the Hamas is winning.
Well, the jury is out. I'm not saying that anybody is winning at this point. They paid a very heavy price. They lost like 12,000 people or more. They have 10,000 people that are injured. It's a Pyrrhus victory, right? It's a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah, Pyrrhic, perhaps. We see it.
But I don't think anybody has won yet. It's the decision of who won would be taken after the war, and the war is still being fought.
Yeah.
It's too early to say who wins, but definitely we cannot say that we have defeated Hamas. That on our side, we cannot say that we defeated Hamas if we are going to stop and lose the support of the Americans. So we have to work very hard to explain to the Americans, and I don't see much being done about it. I think that the Israelis should be traveling to Washington in
every week.
Every week. This is the difficulty, Dan, and Yossi, that Hamas has no respect for human lives. It doesn't matter how many people they lost. All they want to see at the end is that they managed to murder 1,200 people, and they're still standing. They're still part of the Palestinian leadership, whether it be in Gaza, discussions with Yossi over the last really just over the last 24 hours. And even that idea of Hamas joining somehow the reconciliation talks that are going on in Russia between Hamas and Fatah, this will all give credibility to Hamas, the umbrella to Hamas, to live another day, to fight another day. And that's what they're looking for the win. That's the Hamas win. It doesn't, and it's almost irrelevant how many people we kill.
Yeah, it's not irrelevant, but it's not going to be the decisive factor of who wins the war. The decisive factor of who wins the war is if Hamas, Sinwar, is able to get out of his tunnel and make a V sign with his fingers and stay alive. This is and he still runs Gaza, or the Gaza population. That's a victory of Hamas. You know, we just saw yesterday when they were showing off as controlling Rafah. It was the police making order in the markets in Rafah. That's good enough for them. We have to take them to deprive from them the ability to govern Rafah, to govern any point in Gaza, to govern the population. Now we are deterred from doing so because we don't want to get involved in directly controlling the population. It's we are so eager to first, before we move into Rafah, we want to make sure that we have somebody who's going to take responsibility for the people in Gaza, which is not going to be us. And that's an oxymoron, and it's a catch-22, because nobody is going to volunteer to assume the responsibility of taking control of the civilian population unless they are totally convinced that Hamas is not coming back. Yeah. And that's something that we have to work out. And we saw how difficult it's going to be. It's not easy. We saw what happened today in northern Gaza. Tells you how complicated it's going to be to be directly responsible for supplying the population with their humanitarian needs. And there's going to be a period of time in which we are going to be responsible for the humanitarian needs. This is very, very complicated. But at the end of the day, we cannot run away from those complicated tasks that are in front of us. Otherwise, we can simply give Hamas whatever they want, and that's it. That's ridiculous.
Yossi, the final issue here. You were the head of military intelligence assessment for a number of years in the directorate there. You've been involved with many, many wars in your professional career. What is the unique addition of this war that you can add to your very, very large repository of lessons learned from your illustrious career spanning probably 50, if I'm not mistaken, 50 years, over 50 years?
Well, yeah, 50 years, I would say. Major lessons learned in my mind is that when we thought that the weakening of the idea of using standing forces against us, like the armed forces of Syria or the armed forces of Egypt or the armed forces of Jordan, would make it much easier for us to contend with the existential threats that we are facing, we were mistaken. I mean, I pointed out at it that sub-conventional and over-conventional, unconventional threats are not less dangerous than conventional threats. But I think as long as this was just a war of terror, we thought that it's something manageable. And we were surprised again and again in this respect. We were surprised in '87 with the first Intifada. No arms almost, but a lot of terror spread all over the territory, caused us a lot of damage. We were not surprised, but we were not astonished, but we were surprised also with the. I personally was not surprised. I said before the second Intifada it's going to be six years, so I was not surprised at all. But as a state, we were surprised of what happened in the second Intifada. Was also a reflection of what can happen. Then we had in between we had the wars in Lebanon, and that were wars against terrorism. But still, they all started with a small terror attack that we responded to in a large war. Yeah, here is for the first time that we were attacked in a large-scale war by a terror organization. That was not already a terror organization; it was a hybrid organization, both terror and the military. Mm-hmm. And they carried out an attack that surprised us, that astonished us, that caught us totally unprepared. And this is something that, and on top of that, the element of the hostages that we were discussing until now made it even more complicated. And we were caught totally unprepared. We invent the map and invent the things that we have to do while we do them. So fortunately, we are very good at improvising, so we improvise well. But this is something we were totally unprepared because we didn't envisage this kind of terror attack against us, this scale, so well prepared for so long, and so well equipped with intelligence that enabled them to be sufficiently successful in the first day. And they don't need more than 1 day. 1 day was good enough for them. It's 1 day of actually controlling vast areas of southwestern Israel was good enough for them in order to cause everything that followed. And we didn't understand it. We didn't understand what we didn't think this can happen, and we didn't understand what it would mean if it is going to happen. It's and we are still trying to figure out what does it mean. What do we have to do? How do we have to change our national security concept? How do we have to change the way we are militarily built, and how do we have to change the way we think about ourselves? We thought of ourselves as omnipotent country. We can do everything, right? We can do Entebbe, we can do Tehran, take the archives of the nuclear project from Iran, the heart of Tehran. We are superheroes. Intelligence-wise, we are so capable. We have access to everything. We know everything, and everybody made us believe that this is the case. You know, all these stories about the Israelis that they can do whatever they want, and the way everybody spoke about Israeli intelligence made us believe that this is true. This is actually the situation. Only on October 7th we realized that this was nonsense, and so our own self-perception is being challenged. Now, I hope this is going to be for the better, because we were good at improvising and responding, but it's not going to be easy. Another thing that is closer to your heart, I think, Dan, is the way we were surprised with what's happening in the international community, and especially on the streets of the West. You knew about it. We, in the Jerusalem Center, wrote about it for ages.
Yeah.
Unmasking BDS, unmasking SJP, and unmasking this and unmasking that, and we were so much in the business of fighting BDS and understanding how the buildup of the approach to Israel as a terror state, apartheid state, criminal state, state that doesn't have the legitimacy to exist, was building up. We followed it closely, and we were not surprised as the JCPA. Okay, but it's not about the JCPA. The public and the state were surprised. All our efforts, Dan, you and me together, we were trying to convince the government for 10 years, more than 10 years, that look, you should worry about what's coming up in all these places. We ignored that, and now what happens is that in the United States, the ability of the Democratic Party to support Israel is being eroded by the growing part of BDSers and the delegitimizers of Israel inside its ranks. And all of these things, it's a perfect storm of all these things being put together in a time that was chosen by Yahya Sinwar. I'm not sure he thought about all these elements, but he thought that the time is ripe to move. And we are facing a very huge strategic challenge that we have to bear in mind also when we deal with the hostages and when we deal with the question of Rafah, because it's all of these things are interconnected, and we have to make sure that we come out of that with a plan of how to better our ability to cope with these strategic threats.
Yeah, very good.
And that's really the understanding that they have been preparing for years and years. One of the interesting things that I saw recently was that there appear to have been more demonstrations on the streets of the Western capitals than there have been in the Arab countries in favor of the Palestinians. And really the Palestinians have found themselves rejected by all of the Arab countries, Egypt preventing them from coming in. None of the Arab countries have really offered any type of help to the Palestinians, allowing them to run away from the war. And that's, I think, something which has been quite an eye-opener for everyone.
They did send them humanitarian aid, and they do speak in favor of them, but they don't do much. And the most striking thing is that the Iranian people are not going to the streets to support the Palestinians. On the contrary, what you have is the Iranians in the diaspora participating in demonstrations in favor of Israel. That's what you have. But
one of the aid packages from Jordan was actually airlifted in today, and
yes.
and it failed to reach its target because of the winds that the pilots didn't take into account, and actually landed in Israel. That's possibly the effectiveness of the Jordanian assistance to the Palestinians in Gaza.
I'm sure we shall deliver it to the Palestinians. Don't worry.
Exactly. We should be delivering it, and not allowing Hamas and not allowing UNRWA or any other front for Hamas to be the ones delivering it. Yossi, thank you for your time. Unfortunately, we've again run out of time on our side. Thank you for your insights, and to all of you who have joined us, thank you again for joining us. We will hopefully be back with you again next week, and for the continuation of the War Room updates. And in the meantime, keep safe. Yossi, have a good Shabbat and Chodesh Tov as well. The start of Adar already coming up on Sunday.
Well, I hope that by Purim we shall see a big victory of Israel.
Let's hope so.
Thank
In
you,
the meantime,
Yossi.
keep safe.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you very much.
Bye.